Random House Audio presents The Female Brain by Louann Brizendine, M.D. This is the author, Louann Brizendine. What makes us women? More than 99% of male and female genetic coding is exactly the same. Out of the 30,000 genes in the human genome, the less than 1% variation between the sexes is small. But that percentage difference influences every single cell in our bodies, from the nerves that register pleasure and pain to the neurons that transmit perception, thoughts, feelings, and emotions. To the observing eye, the brains of females and males are not the same. Male brains are larger by about 9%, even after correcting for body size. In the 19th century, scientists took this to mean that women had less mental capacity than men. Women and men, however, have the same number of brain cells. The cells are just packed more densely in women, cinched corset-like into a smaller skull. For much of the 20th century, most scientists assumed that women were essentially small men, neurologically and in every other way except for their reproductive functions. That assumption has been at the heart of enduring misunderstandings about female psychology and physiology. When you look a little deeper into the brain differences, they reveal what makes women women and men men. Until the 1990s, researchers paid little attention to female physiology, neuroanatomy, or psychology separate from that of men. I saw this oversight firsthand during my undergraduate years in neurobiology at Berkeley in the 1970s, during my medical education at Yale, and during my training in psychiatry at the Massachusetts Mental Health Center at Harvard Medical School. While enrolled at each of these institutions, I learned little or nothing about female biology or neurological differences outside of pregnancy. When a professor presented a study about animal behavior one day at Yale, I raised my hand and asked what the research findings were for females in that study. The male professor dismissed my question, stating, "We never use females in these studies. Their menstrual cycles would just mess up the data." The little research that was available, however, suggested that the brain differences, though subtle, were profound. As a resident in psychiatry, I became fascinated by the fact that there was a 2-to-1 ratio of depression in women compared with men. No one was offering any clear reasons for this discrepancy. Because I had gone to college at the peak of the feminist movement, my personal explanations ran toward the political and the psychological. I took the typical 1970s stance that the patriarchy of Western culture must have been the culprit. It must have kept women down and made them less functional than men. But that explanation alone didn't seem to fit. New studies were uncovering the same depression ratio worldwide. I started to think that something bigger, more basic and biological was going on. One day, it struck me that the male versus female depression rates didn't start to diverge until females turned 12 or 13, the age girls began menstruating. It appeared that the chemical changes at puberty did something in the brain to trigger more depression in women. Few scientists at the time were researching this link, and most psychiatrists like me had been trained in traditional psychoanalytic theory, which examined childhood experience, but never considered that specific female brain chemistry might be involved. When I started taking a woman's hormonal state into account as I evaluated her psychiatrically, I discovered the massive neurological effects her hormones have during different stages of life in shaping her desires, her values, and the very way she perceives reality. My first epiphany about the different realities created by sex hormones came when I started treating women with what I call extreme premenstrual brain syndrome. In all menstruating women, the female brain changes a little every day. Some parts of the brain change up to 25% every month. Things get rocky at times, but for most women, the changes are manageable. Some of my patients, though, came to me feeling so jerked around by their hormones on some days that they couldn't work or speak to anyone because they'd either burst into tears or bite someone's head off. Most weeks of the month they were engaged, intelligent, productive, and optimistic, but a mere shift in the hormonal flood to their brains on certain days left them feeling that the future looked bleak and that they hated themselves and their lives. These thoughts felt real and solid, and these women acted on them as though they were reality and would last forever, even though they arose solely from hormonal shifts in their brains. As soon as the tides changed, they were back to their best selves. This extreme form of PMS, which is present in only a few % of women, introduced me to how the female brain's reality can turn on a dime. If a woman's reality could change radically from week to week, the same would have to be true of the massive hormonal changes that occur throughout a woman's life. I wanted the chance to find out more about these possibilities on a broader scale, and so, in 1994, I founded the Women's Mood and Hormone Clinic in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco. It was one of the first clinics in the country dedicated to looking at women's brain states and how neurochemistry and hormones affect their moods. What we've found is that the female brain is so deeply affected by hormones that their influence can be said to create a woman's reality. They can shape a woman's values and desires and tell her, day to day, what's important. Their presence is felt at every stage of life, right from birth. Each hormone state, girlhood, the adolescent years, the dating years, motherhood, and menopause, acts as fertilizer for different neurological connections that are responsible for new thoughts, emotions, and interests. Because of the fluctuations that begin as early as 3 months old and last until after menopause, a woman's neurological reality is not as constant as a man's. His is like a mountain that is worn away imperceptibly over the millennia by glaciers, weather, and the deep tectonic movements of the earth. Hers is more like the weather itself, constantly changing and hard to predict. New brain science has rapidly transformed our view of basic neurological differences between men and women. Earlier scientists could investigate these differences only by studying the brains of cadavers or the symptoms of individuals with brain damage. But thanks to advances in genetics and non-invasive brain imaging technology, there's been a complete revolution in neuroscientific research and theory. New tools such as positron emission tomography, or PET, and functional magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, scans now allow us to see inside the human brain in real time, while it's solving problems, producing words, retrieving memories, noticing facial expressions, establishing trust, falling in love, listening to babies cry, and feeling depression, fear, and anxiety. As a result, scientists have documented an astonishing array of structural, chemical, genetic, hormonal, and functional brain differences between women and men. We've learned that men and women have different brain sensitivities to stress and conflict. They use different brain areas and circuits to solve problems, process language, experience, and store the same strong emotion. Women may remember the smallest details of their first dates and their biggest fights, while their husbands barely remember that these things happened at all. Brain structure and chemistry have everything to do with why this is so. The female and male brains process stimuli, hear, see, sense, and gauge what others are feeling in different ways. Our distinct female and male brain operating systems are mostly compatible and adept, but they perform and accomplish the same goals and tasks using different circuits. In a German study, researchers
Sample complete. Ready to continue?